Hi, everyone. My name is Barbra Dillon. I am the editor-in-chief of Fanbase Press, and I'm honored to be here today with a wonderfully talented and incredibly insightful panel of journalists to assess the current landscape of comic book journalism, to acknowledge the areas of greatest challenge for career journalists and how they've evolved to this date, and to anticipate what the future may hold for the industry. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Tiffany Babb, who is a critic, editor, and pop culture journalist who has served as deputy editor for Popverse and co-editor of the Eisner Award-winning Panel by Panel magazine. She loves talking and writing about comics, musical theater, and movies of all sorts. Tiffany, thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We also have Erik Amaya, who is the editor-in-chief of Comiccon.com, the comics on TV columnist at Rotten Tomatoes, and co-host of the podcast Tread Perilously, which is part of the Fanbase Press podcast network. Erik, thank you for being here.
Oh, nice to be here.
And we have Lisa Gullickson, who is a journalist whose writing appears on Film School Rejects, The Beat, Comics Bookcase, and Adventures in Poor Taste. She also co-hosts the podcast Comic Book Couples Counseling, which has been heralded as one of the best, and it is, comic book podcasts by BuzzFeed, The Mary Sue, and Screen Rant. Lisa, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And last but certainly not least, we have Brad Gullickson, who is a critic and pop culture scribbler, having written for Film School Rejects, Deep Leak, Daily Grindhouse, and others. In 2018, Leonard Maltin named him one of film journalism's new voices. Along with Lisa, he co-hosts the podcast Comic Book Couples Counseling. Brad, thank you for being here.
Hello, my pleasure.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into this conversation. I like to start by asking the big question. Why journalism? What was the path that led each of you to a career of interacting with and covering the latest news and participants in the comic book industry? And we'll extend that to pop culture as well. Tiffany, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, it really happened with Popverse. I never considered myself a journalist. I was a critic. And, when you're in the field, if news happens, you comment on it sometimes. But I was never doing any actual reporting until I started at Popverse, where a big part of my job is doing actual reporting. So I trained up on the job, and I really found it very satisfying in a lot of ways. It gave me a completely different understanding of how news is made, and also kind of just a better understanding, I think, of the industry, because you're just talking to more people about different things that aren't necessarily related to what you're doing. And that's provided me like a really invaluable perspective.
And Lisa, what about you?
I started with podcasting. I enjoyed that so much. And then opportunities would arise where, hey, you could do coverage for this or that outlet. And, I always got good grades on my essays at school. And so yeah, I waltzed right into it, and I'm having a great time.
Erik, what about you?
Gosh, this all started because the year I decided I wasn't going to go to San Diego Comic-Con was the year that an artist was going to go, and I wanted to go to his panel, so I sort of fell into it. A friend of mine was like, "Oh, hey, well, you could cover the panel for Comic Book Resources," and it's like, that sounds great. They offered me a handful of other things, and from that, it just became, "Oh, hey, can you do this? Can you do this?" I became the movie guy, and here I am 15 years later running a website.
And
That's where
Brad,
we
what
are.
about what about you, Brad?
Many years ago, in the early days of the internet, while I was still at college, one of my first proper paying jobs was writing film reviews for this website called The Cabinet of Dr. Casey. And I just got that by, basically haunting the message boards there. And they were like, "Well, you want to write reviews for $20?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." And I did that for a good while, and then fell away from it because I realized you can't really survive off of $20 paychecks. And eventually I found my way back to it through my relationship with the Alamo Draft House, and doing screenings, hostings for them, and then writing about those hostings for various outlets. And somehow I got to Film School Rejects, and somehow we got into podcasting, and here we are.
Well, I want to open this up to everybody. So, anyone who would like to jump in, please feel free to do so. But journalism, especially in the area of myriad social media platforms, content platforms, looks vastly different in the ways that it's generated and dispersed to its audiences. Print journalism has, of course, given way to digital content, radio stations given way to podcasting, etc. How do each of you define journalism? And do you feel that the field has evolved since your start in the industry? And again, open it to everyone.
Well, it pays
To
less.
me, well, that too. Oh my God. But to me, I think journalism at the core of it, beyond like because there's so many people online sharing information that is useful, to me, the distinction between that and journalism is kind of holding to journalistic ethics. Making
Mhm.
sure you have your sources ready instead of just tweeting a rumor that you heard. Kind of having the professionalism to follow through to be able to and when things go wrong to be able to take accountability for that. I feel like there's a lot of people who many people think of as distributing news who are in many ways distributing news but aren't able to take accountability and aren't able to be held to those standards. So to me, like, those are the differences.
It's also kind of curating the conversation because there are so many conversations going on. It's figuring out, well, where is the signal? Where is it actually worth discussing versus, I don't know, someone posting a random photo on Twitter and a certain site just taking off with that photo and deciding, yeah, this is newsworthy when it really isn't. It's finding that editorial space and being like, this is worth spotlighting.
Brad, Lisa, what about you?
Yeah, I was being flippant by saying it pays less, but I mean, it is also true. With as great as the internet is, and everyone can now create a website and everyone can be a journalist to some degree or another, it does make it hard for you to earn a living, finding a place that can support writers financially. And, the ad space has plummeted in recent years as well. And so I feel like you have to come to a decision of, what are you willing to do and for how much?
Do you feel like you're seeing, because in mentioning the different content platforms and social media platforms, do you see interesting new avenues for journalism in things like TikTok or other spaces? Erik,
I'm
we'll start with
I'm
you.
well,
Oh,
sorry.
no, no, please go right ahead.
I just wanted to jump in there. Like, I'm wary of new places just because when I do venture into them, and let's say you have success like we did on Twitter initially, well, actually, how much success in that realm brings eyes back to your writing or
Mm.
your podcast?
I found areas like Patreon, places where you can go on those various platforms and bring your readers or your listeners to this collected space where you can really truly have an interaction with people who have actually engaged with what you're putting out. I think has been something that's been really fulfilling for us.
All right, I'll do the hot take. TikTok's the devil. It is. It's for the longest time I was just like, well, TikTok, that's for the kids. It's the next generation, whatever. Now I look at it as utter communicative poison. It disrupts discourse. It's everyone trying to get these hits and these views for seemingly no end, but that clout, I guess. And it completely disrupts, what actual communication looks like, I think.
About TikTok, I don't think it's completely the devil. I think there's some good stuff there too. I mean, if you look at, like, I think it's NPR, the Washington Post, they make really good, interesting, engaging stuff that people are watching, and that is real news. I think the double-edged sword of social media is that it is, in many ways, a democratization. Everybody's voice starts at the same level until you start getting your engagement right. The issue here, the good part is that voices that weren't heard before can get heard now. Stories that are kind of hidden, maybe people aren't talking about them as much, can be shared. The bad part is that you get these people who aren't doing their research, who are spouting lies, who are actually on purpose manipulating stories, put out there with the same on the same platform as like real journalists who are doing their real work. Like there are real journalists on TikTok, even if they're doing it with puppets, like it's still real journalism. They're still being held to that standard. They're still working at papers, or maybe they're independent journalists, but it's all in there with all this rotten information. And that's a very complicated, weird thing that I don't think people as readers or consumers of news have really been able, like they do it on purpose to like they make it difficult to parse out the real from the fake on purpose, and that's an issue.
And I do think, going back to the question of like what has changed during our time doing this thing, I think the audience's relationship to journalism has changed drastically. And because of the things that Tiffany is talking about, there is a lot of distrust or antagonism towards what we see online or in the paper or on TV. And that's tremendously challenging.
To go one bit further about changes, I feel like that adversarial relationship is more acute, and you feel free to disagree with me. It's very acute if you're still producing print online.
Yeah.
That for whatever reason that is where you get, oh well, Disney paid you to say this.
Yes.
Where if you're doing it on a YouTube
yeah.
channel, for some reason there's validity there that is just automatically conferred upon random Yahoo talking at Kathleen Kennedy is destroying things. For some reason, that's more trustworthy than a person who goes through all the right channels and does all the right things and produces a journalistically credible article.
Sure,
like
it's
that's
inside or outsider thing.
right? Yeah.
But I can
It's
also
hard.
understand how that occurs, right? Because we're all fighting for attention and viewership. We have also started doing a lot of like, publishing of press releases with a little bit of editorial on top.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does sometimes feel like, okay, well, what are we doing? What are these sites doing? Are we being just advertisements for studios and publishers?
I hear that and I do see it, obviously, but I do feel like that gets rolled up into this bigger narrative, especially in comics journalism, where you'll see people say there's no real, oh, I mean, this is the annoying bit. But when the whole Eisner's thing went by and we had a piece on, I think we broke the story that the Eisners wouldn't have a comics journalism category this year. And I saw a screenshot from an established comics professional of our headline saying, but there's no real comics journalism anymore.
Right.
I'm like, who do you think wrote this story? Like someone had to wake up, me in this case. It's not always me breaking news. Someone had to wake up, someone had to notice it. I had a nice friend who sent me an email about it. Someone had to notice it. Someone had to sit down, do the research, reach out to the organization, get a quote, put all this stuff together. And I think people don't realize that takes time and it takes effort. And it's labor, right? It's work. And so when that's just like my little soapbox, but it's quite annoying when I hear that. And at Popverse, we don't we read press releases, but we don't do the whole copy and paste thing at all. And yet I think people think we do. And I think a big percentage of it is that they're just not reading the sites that they're talking about sometimes.
Well, as we
I agree with everything you're saying.
yes, co-signed. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and I have to say, Tiffany, that was a phenomenal article that you did on the journalism category for the Eisner Awards. So thank you for your work. It is very much appreciated. Well, as we dive into our main topic at hand, the comic book industry and the entertainment industry as a whole across all mediums are really struggling with large-scale disruptions and changes that, when paired with the residual impacts of the pandemic and last year's WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes, are leaving entire sectors of entertainment workers unsure of what's to come. I would really love to garner each of your perspectives on where entertainment journalism, is currently as a field at the present moment. Erik, we'll start with you.
I would advise people not to get into it right now, just because the contraction isn't done. For whatever reasons the expansion happened over the pandemic or over the lockdowns rather, that contraction isn't done happening. So it's unclear how many outlets there's going to be, how many worthwhile outlets there's going to be. and how many jobs there's going to be for the people there, because any one person can work at 3 outlets simultaneously. It's that easy. Um, so it's a situation where I would say it's not growth for people who aren't in it right now, but for the people who are and can kind of survive that thing, I think there's still opportunity.
And Eric, to stay with you for one more moment, what
Mhm,
what is your experience like right now? I mean, you're the editor in chief of an
mhm.
outlet. You work at several others. Is this a manageable existence? What is life
I
like
mean,
right
it's
now?
it's manageable for the moment,
Yeah.
but it could get tougher at a moment's notice. I mean, it's like this has been the wildest month I've had in a while, where it's like I've been on 2 set visits over the last 2 or 3 weeks, still trying to run the site while I'm halfway across the world, and still trying to find time to record a podcast. Like it's pretty intense. All those things are income generating avenues, and you're looking at a way to service all of those things simultaneously and still sleep. Which at some point maybe one of those things has to go. Who knows? Um, it's tough. It can be tough. Yeah.
Tiffany, what about you?
I mean, I'm in a funny situation because I'm about to leave my extremely stable full-time with benefits job, and there aren't a lot of those in the entertainment industry. There are almost none. And I was extremely lucky to have the opportunity to step up and be able to do that work with like this really great team on a site that I believe in. And now I'm about to about to leave it, which sounds kind of unwise in many ways, and in a way it's unwise too. But as for the overall, like it is bad. It's terrible. I mean, as Eric said and Brad mentioned earlier, like ad revenue is gone. Google SEO has really screwed people over. Um, I've heard friends talk about their fairly successful sites getting traffic cut in half. And like with ad revenue going down, like it's completely made previously profitable enterprises completely unprofitable. Um, so everyone's kind of getting it from all sides right now, which is really horrendous. Um, and I think the only advice for people who are interested in coming in is that treat it as a part-time job. Like think of it as a long-term project. You're investing in yourself, but I would say, at least for now and for the foreseeable future, don't think of it as somewhere where you're going to go and be a salary that you yourself on, unless you are like I was 2 years ago, like extraordinarily lucky, win lottery kind of lucky.
Mm.
Brad and Lisa, as a married couple, I would imagine that this impacts you financially as well. What is your experience?
We've gone to move our energy towards our own projects and creating more of our own platform. We've discovered that we can't necessarily depend on other outlets to look for opportunities for us. And so we found that through, like during the pandemic, we really started growing what we do and really honing our perspective and thinking about what we want to represent as part of journalism, but also as advocates for the medium and people who really want to be participants in keeping this medium alive. And for us, it's been it has its challenges, but at the same time, we have found a community of people who are really willing to support us and bolster us, and not just financially, but like emotionally and spiritually. It's really important. So there has been times when we have been really scared, and there have been times where we literally could not be happier. So
And we cannot stop doing it. I think
right.
that's the other thing is,
Mm.
when recently having lost a really nice cushy columnist job, it was soul crushing. At the same time, like I couldn't stop doing what I was doing for them, and also maybe I could just do what I was doing for them for me, and maybe we can actually find value in what we have created at Comic Book Couples Counseling. And it's wobbly, but we're trying to make it work.
All of the comments that each of you have been raising, I keep in the back of my mind, keep thinking late stage capitalism and what this is doing to all of us. But
Mm.
that's a question that I want to pose to all of you. That we at Fanbase Press believe that you are a journalist, you are a comic book creator. No matter if you're doing it part time, if you're doing it while working outside of the industry or your given field, if you are doing it and you are passionate about it, we believe that you are X thing. You are a writer, you are a journalist. But as each of you have mentioned, there is a need sometimes to look outside of the industry to look for supplemental work. Do you feel like that is an increasing instance right now? Do you feel like fellow journalists that you talk to or you yourselves have the need to look at outside opportunities just to make ends meet?
I had never made the full switch. So I have another career that I'm extremely fulfilled and happy with. I teach private music lessons, piano students and voice students. I'm also a local musician. I sing weddings, I sing funerals, right? So if you're getting married or you're dead, you can call me. I will show up. I sing beautifully. But when I started to want to include journalism more, I left the classroom. I started freelancing in that other area. So I have both of my feet on two different ice flows, and we'll see see which one keeps me afloat.
I've been at this for so long that I don't know what like a normal kind of 9 to 5 would look like at this point. Like my last quote unquote normal 9 to 5 was literally copy editing home video packaging. Like that's yeah, and that's still kind of connected to this way of life. So like I don't really know what that would look like at this point. It would have to be another outlet, another platform. I don't know if it could be something diametrically different. I don't know if I could go and work at a library and still do this. I don't know if that's possible.
For me, as I leave Popverse, I'm planning on teaching. I taught before I was at Popverse at a local university, and I love it. And I mean, it's not that different from editing in a lot of ways. You're training young writers, so I'm really looking forward to going back to teaching part time. It's also as a full-time like freelance writer, which I struggled with for a bit emotionally because you're in a room by yourself all day in and day out, especially when you're not doing the reporting stuff and going like to events and talking to human beings. Like when I was just a critic, like it was rough. Like I would go days without talking to another human, days without going outside. No, I'd go outside, but like it just wasn't mentally good for me personally. So having like being able to talk to students 2 3 times a week, being able to share whatever knowledge that I've garnered over the years, be able to mentor people, like that has been really rewarding in a very different way than like writing and editing is.
Do you find I think you raise a really great point, Tiffany, in terms of your well-being and how your work as a journalist, it may be impacting your well-being. Are there day-to-day challenges that each of you experience in your journalistic efforts? And Tiffany and Erik, I look to you, especially because you're maintaining staffs. What challenges do you run into now and in the past with maintaining a staff? Erik, we'll start with you.
Wow, gosh. It ranges from everything to the shocking notion of office politics when there's no office. Which like when I took over, I did not expect that to be a thing, and within 3 months, it was a thing. And my first response was, "How could this happen? People aren't around each other to actually clash." But it does happen. We we kind of had to grow systems to kind of deal with that along the way. Where if it's just as simple as having a spreadsheet where everyone is very clear what books they're reviewing or who they're getting to interview or things like that. I mean, at least that's there and that information smooths over things. But that exists. And it's so wild because no one would tell you, "Oh, hey, get ready to manage people's personalities."
Tiffany, what about you?
I've not had it nearly as bad as other people have had, but harassment, like,
Mm,
the odd death threat in your email is not great. But really, I think we're in a very small industry where everyone is struggling. And so people, even when they're trying to be as nice and kind and polite as possible, like there's some bad attitudes out there that can be kind of harmful at times. So that's tough. And like it also just sucks to see people struggling all the time and covering layoffs and reading about horrible stories that are happening in the industry, abuse, all of that stuff. Like it's mentally rough. And again, like I think the biggest counter to that is, like, I'm going to go back to teaching, but like is also just having friends. Having friends both in the industry and outside of the industry, because you need people to complain to about stuff that only they will know and care about, but you also need people who remind you that you got to touch grass, and that like whatever today's Twitter, I need to get off Twitter, whatever today's Twitter drama is not actually important. It's just people being angry. So I think like having people say support system all the time, but having a general group of people that you can rely on to talk to and be able to like kind of right your boat sometimes if you're feeling like you're tilting, I think that can be extremely useful in a case like this one.
And I think to build off of that, it's also important to get away from the screen.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like I know they say, oh, if you work at if your job is a computer thing, you should look away every 20 minutes. But I think an adjunct to that is, every week you've got to get away for a day at the very least, where you're not on Twitter, you're not looking at the socials, you're not worrying about metrics, where it's just, oh, there is a life that exists outside of this damn machine.
Yeah.
And I neglect it way too often. Let me go deal with that.
And Brad and Lisa, you're in a different situation. You are, in a way, your own bosses. Do you feel like there are challenges that you each deal with day to day that others may not see or be
There's a
aware of?
lot of inner office politics.
Yeah.
It's impossible to leave work at work. You know what I mean? Because we're doing this full time. And
I didn't know we were allowed to look away from the screens.
we're taking notes.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. Yeah, like I what Eric's talking about is something that I struggle with a lot right now in this very moment as we're talking. I had to plug my phone in another room just to come to this screen and enjoy this screen. But I think like Lisa and I, we talk a lot about tending our garden, even with like the online community, mutes and blocks and not engaging in the discourse, even though you're like, I've got a take on this discourse, I can contribute. I often just find myself like, the conversation is happening, I'm not going to add anything to it, I'm just going to go talk about something else.
We are also really privileged where we do get to set the tone, where we generally choose to stay pretty positive,
which was not the case when we were working for other people.
Yeah. So we try to keep comic book couples counseling a super safe space for everyone. So we're pretty lucky.
Yeah, no, that's true. At Comic-Con, we definitely try to keep things positive. Where I guess our decision that something is negative is omission. If we're not talking about something, that mean you can pretty
That's what
much
we do.
guess what our opinion is if we're not talking about it. And it definitely leads to a better mental health situation than chasing a story because negativity equals clicks. It's just better off that way.
But also sometimes you do need to speak out. You do.
Oh yeah.
You do need to address something. I just find that it's better to address it in a longer form than in a tweet or a thread or whatever social media we're using.
You'd be shocked with how like people find the I wrote up a little news item of a Star Wars hot sauce, and I got like the nastiest comment about, and not towards me, but about the hot sauce, and I was just like, who cares that much personally? Or what, we don't even really do reviews at Popverse, but I wrote a very like somewhat positive, not really negative at all review about a TV show once, and it was it was brutal what people were saying in the
Oh,
comments. And I was just like,
it's
this is the most like basic, like, yeah, I had a good time. And people are just like calling me names.
no,
Yeah,
I've at Rotten Tomatoes, I've had a couple articles where people freak out because my inclusion of a thing was somehow interpreted as endorsement.
Gosh.
Like I just mentioned in this article, there was some discussion about having Michael B. Jordan play Superman. And a couple weeks later, I got this thing on Twitter. It's like, well, you said you wanted a black Superman. But that's not what I said. I said this was something that was being reported. Recently, I mentioned some of the Brian Herbert Dune stuff as possibilities where the Dune series could go. And the first comment is, why would you ever want any of the Brian Herbert stuff? I'm like, I'm not
so
endorsing it.
funny.
I don't understand it. You read the text. Where does
Yeah.
it say I am personally endorsing the Brian Herbert stuff? Like it's so bizarre the way that, at least for some readers, inclusion is endorsement.
Mhm.
It's not any inclusion in the sense of you're mentioning a detail, a fact that exists, and somehow that is endorsement. It's very bizarre.
There's
Yeah.
another thing I feel like I struggle with how quickly stories turn over.
Mm.
I find personally sometimes I can get a little bit of like summit syndrome where I like will do an interview and it would be successful and we're like so proud. And then the next week, like nobody's talking about it. And are we relevant? And does anybody care and see what they're doing? Like that thing of like, unless I put something out yesterday that I'm proud of, I can be a real unhappy person, a real sad sack.
My
Well,
advice for that, I have actual advice for that. One is, everybody says keep all the clips of nice things that people say, but the one that actually works for me is I have to have a list of everything I've done. Like,
Mm,
or else I will think I did nothing this week. Like, I need to have
yeah.
a literal list of every single task. And it also helps me because I forget things very easily, just like doing my tasks of the day. But if I feel like, oh, this week I didn't do anything, blah, 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 we haven't put something out in ages. And like, if I look and I'm like, oh, actually, we published something 3 days ago, I'm just being weird brained right now.
Okay.
Because I also fall into that.
Lisa and I literally had that conversation 24 hours ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Tiffany, we are going to take your advice and we are going to create a list of accomplishments because if you're not looking at them, they don't exist.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's true.
And I think advice for someone who's coming into this business is that it's very easy to forget what you have accomplished. It's very easy for that stuff to disappear because it is always so, well, what's next? What's next? And sometimes you do just need to stop, take stock, and I don't know, be like, hey, I sang happy birthday to Bruce Boxleitner once. That's a thing that happened that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't in this job. So that's also super important.
A great thing was actually writing our bios for Barbara, because we were like, because then you have to then research yourself and then go like, oh, that did happen. I'm proud. Like, why did I have to wait? You know, I'm so happy to do that for you, Barbara. But like, why
Thank
did I do that for myself?
Well, all of this wonderful conversation raises two questions for you. And the first is the concept of imposter syndrome. This is something
Mm.
we've been talking a lot about, especially with creators, but I really want to get your perspective as journalists. Have you yourself experienced imposter syndrome, or do you see it in colleagues? We'll start there. Brad, why don't we start with you?
Oh no, never. No.
You mean like right now, like what I'm feeling right now?
Getting this invitation to this conversation. Yeah, I experience a lot of imposter syndrome, and I'm only bolstered by the fact that every creative person I've ever read or listened to says that they do. And when some of your favorite people on the planet talk about their imposter syndrome, it just sort of makes you feel better about your own. I think it's if it's not a daily battle, it's a constant battle. And it's I think creating a list of your accomplishments, writing a bio of things that you have done. I think that certainly helps me.
Lisa, what
Yeah,
about you? Or Erik,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
oh,
Please feel free.
okay. Now I was gonna say I think it's unavoidable. I think it's part and parcel with the creative process that just any sort of, non uh, automatic mechanical kind of process, that you're sort of left with that feeling, am I doing enough? Is this good enough? Am I fooling everybody? I can't imagine someone coming into any sort of these spaces and doing it with absolute confidence, other than people who have no talent, because somehow that happens, right? The utter talentlessness somehow generates absolute confidence. So, that's where I'm going to go. Is I think
At
imposter
least
syndrome is
perceived.
unavoidable.
I always wonder, like I think I was poisoned early on with the idea of fake it till you make it.
Mm,
And I know that people have thought that, boy, Brad is super confident. He's I know that people will sometimes just think like, you're doing it, you're making it, and then they'll talk to me and I'll be like, oh, I feel like I'm 1 week away from being on the street.
I
mm,
feel like journalism kind of lends itself to people with imposter syndrome because we are the people who are like, but look at my sources. You know what I
mm-hmm.
mean? Like, this isn't just a thought I had in my head. I asked an important person and they said this as well. You know what I mean?
And there's that thing where we're both teachers, we're both former teachers. Well, you're a current teacher, but we are both classroom teachers. And there's that whole like cliche of those that don't do teach, and you often see that getting applied to journalists as well. Like, well, you're writing about the art, you're not making the art, and therefore you are lesser. And sometimes I find myself encountering that barrage and succumbing to it.
This is all fascinating to me because and not that I never have imposter syndrome, but I don't struggle with it as much as I feel like many others do. And I feel like part of it is just like, I, I don't know. I don't know if it's a confidence thing or if it's just a like, maybe I take the work seriously in the way that like I think it's serious work, but I also don't take the work seriously, as in like it is kind of silly what we do in many ways. Like obviously it's incredibly important. We cover important stories and like this is a medium that deserves serious coverage. But at the end of the day, like, and maybe it's that I don't take myself seriously. And it's like, oh, comics journalist, like, of course I'm a comics journalist. Like that seems like the kind of job I would have. But I think one of the big things that um, I talk to when I talk to young creators of any sort is that they were always in some sort of educational system, and I'm sure this happened to me too, but like compared and ranked. And the idea was like you had to be the best or else you wouldn't be able to have a career. And I think that is like the number one destroyer of careers, right? It's the number one cause of imposter syndrome because people are like, well, I'm not the best. How could I possibly have a job? Like, I must be tricking everyone to thinking I'm the best. And at the end of the day, you don't have to be the best. You just have to be professional and good, right? And I feel like if more people were able to get that kind of framework, then like it's like, well, yeah, like yeah, if you have confidence in your work that it's good and it's professional and that you have some degree of skill and training over your years of work, like there's not that big like huge chasm between me and this ideal journalist or an ideal critic, ideal creator, famous writer, whatever, in your head. And I always think that might be why I don't struggle with this as much.
mm.
But it is such a, I see it hurt like really incredible writers all the time. Like people end up quitting because they feel like they're not it. And it's such a brain thing, right? It's a lens through which we see the world, and it's very harmful.
I also found that the moment I started really supporting peers and the work that they are doing and, sharing their work, I felt better about myself.
Mm.
And once you embrace that, you stop doing a little bit of that comparing and despairing.
That's a really great point, Brad. I think that this conversation lends itself very well and very easily in transitioning to the next question, which is, we may, some of us struggle with our own confidence in our work, in what we're doing, but do you feel supported by the comic book industry, the pop culture industry? Do you feel that you, as a journalist, and the work that you're doing is valued and appreciated? Just open it up to everybody.
Increasingly, the comic book industry, yes. Like that's an interesting thing, and in part because with with the editors who work with me at Comic Con, it's been we've been looking very consciously at finding smaller publishers to highlight their work. And what we've found by doing that it does feel more like a community at this point, because everyone is trying to be, well, we're not the superheroes, not to throw the superheroes under the bus, but we're not the big two, we're not the big three. Um, and that has led to people being complimentary to what we're doing, and it does feel like we're not just shouting out into the void anymore. Um, television, not so much. And I don't know. I've always found it's easier to engage with television than movies for some reason. So movies have just kind of become this thing, at least for me personally, that I occasionally deal with. Like I haven't written a movie review in a while. I think Dune was the last one, or Dune Part Two rather was the last one. But it's like I'll probably review Deadpool and Wolverine, but anything between here and there, probably not, just because it's difficult to engage with that mindset with the people who have access to that sort of talent. And gosh, there's a third point. What is the third point? And it doesn't feel like the audience even really cares about that material anymore. Where with the comic books, it feels like there is care. It feels like there is that sense of community, and that's a shift that is pretty palpable. And I didn't really feel it until last year, San Diego, where because film and TV were gone, you know, comics, and they've always been there, got to have its spotlight, and it felt so different and so welcoming and so wonderful.
Tiffany, what about you?
From like industry professionals, like let's say publishers and PR people, yeah, absolutely. Like people are very supportive because they want coverage, right? Not that it's all cynical, but like they are supportive. And they read our coverage of other companies too. But I think from comics fans and some creators too, extremely unsupportive. Kind of like what I was saying earlier with people say they want hard news. We write hard news, which we do. It's not like tens of thousands of people are clicking. The tens and thousands of detractors are not reading our like deep dive into like this legal case, right? like and like we do that, like we pour over legal cases, we look at filings, we do these things because these stories are important and need to be told. And of course it's not all we do, we do a bunch of other stuff too, but like when we publish that stuff, which we will continue to, or Popverse will continue to do because it's important, people aren't reading it. And then they complain that it doesn't exist. And it drives me up the wall. And it's so frustrating because I see so much incredible work being done, not just by me, mostly not by me. I don't even write up most of those stories. It's from Graham McMillan and Chris Arendt. And when I see those stories and all the effort that goes into them and the really incredible reporting that happens, and I see like the 10,000th comment on Twitter saying that comics journalism doesn't exist and it's all PR and it's all Marvel reviews, and it's like, well, we don't even publish reviews, so I don't know what you want from us. It really frustrates me. And because we're in a particularly special position where there's pay, but for most people who are doing this, let's say people at the Beat or Comic Book Herald or Sketched, like they're not making salaries off of this, they're not getting health benefits, and they're like, David Harper is doing his work, he's doing these incredible long form interviews with comics professionals, and he has a very passionate readership, right? But like, it's not, his work exists. The fact that his work can exist and people say there's no comics journalism makes me want to die.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's the kind of comic book specific version of how come no one's talking about this.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Which is the thing you see on the socials all the time. Like, okay, except every post prior to the one who said, how come no one's talking about this, is about that topic.
Yeah.
It's just it almost feels like willful blindness sometimes.
Yes.
Like I have to wonder if people say that in bad faith, not
Well, I think
understanding
they
that the
do.
communities are out there, you
Well, I
know?
think that, and people want to believe that it doesn't exist. And want to, people don't search it out, even though they say they want it. And when it exists, they don't support it.
Mhm.
And it's just so frustrating and it's upsetting and it's like it's disheartening, and I can understand why comics journalists leave beyond
Mhm.
the existence of very little to no pay. Like it's just the treatment of it, I think, by the industry in many cases is quite bad.
Mhm.
Yeah, I also do think though you have to focus on the people who are supporting you. And I know in our case we do have our supporters, and you do see the things that you're talking about. Comics journalism doesn't exist. It's just gossip and PR. But then you do have people who are sharing, your articles, your reviews, your podcasts, and they really are great champions of what we want to see, and I'm so grateful to every single person who listens to an episode, who reads an article, reads a review. And what I'm looking at the end of the day is, are people doing that? And as long as people are, if there's even if it's just a few people clicking and reading and enjoying the stuff that we're putting out, we're going to keep on doing it. And I can't really worry about the people who in bad faith just want to stir that pot and rile up, my anger.
Well, as we weigh all of these challenges, there are various self-help and professional resources available to all of us, especially in these very challenging times that we find ourselves. What, if any, are some of the resources that each of you rely on to maintain your well-being and just to, find people who you can commiserate with? Lisa, why don't we start with you?
Um, uh, well, I love our community of fellow readers. I still, in other areas, I try to be a good literary citizen. A turn of phrase I just got from Zach Quaintance, because we interviewed him recently for the Death of Comics bookcase. But like the idea of like, the way that I love the industry is not just by participating as a journalist, but I'm also a reader. I read comics every single day. I love them so much. I participate in book clubs. I participate in film clubs. Um, and I try to keep my spirits as an enthusiast just as high as as a person who creates content. I hate to use the C word.
Brad, what about you?
I would also say that I rely on the community and my friends and my partner, and I wouldn't be able to do it without Lisa. I wouldn't be able to do it without any of our listeners, as I was saying. And
Go outside.
and yeah, community, like Lisa mentioned, book clubs and film clubs, actual spaces where people mingle, I think are really, really important to me. Getting away from this screen, which I have so much difficulty with, and finding people who like the things that I like, going to conventions and getting rejuvenated at conventions is essential for me as well.
Erik, what about you?
Yeah, but very similar. It's friends. Like I have a trivia team, and I mean, because I've been away, I haven't been to trivia in a couple weeks, but very much that helps because they're not in the industry, right? So it's very helpful that that group is out in that other reality. Like Brad was saying, comic conventions in the last 18 months have been amazing in a way that they were not before the pandemic. It at least for me, the way that I was going to conventions, I was just there to work. It was going to panels, writing stuff up. Now it is having conversations to the point where it's like the only thing I want to do when I go to comic convention is book interviews, because talk is so much better than sitting there in a panel room just having information thrown at me. Those are the main things. It's all about the talk to me. Like that is key.
Tiffany?
I talked earlier about friends. Definitely have your friends in the industry and out. Definitely go outside, as y'all were saying. But I think the most important advice that I could give for especially anyone starting out is the job can't be everything. It cannot. It just can't. There's not enough to emotionally sustain you in any job, but especially not this one. It can really suck. And if you let it be everything, you're gonna have a really sucky, like relatively soon future, right? And then the second thing is like this story isn't whatever story you're working on, whatever job you're working on, whatever column, whatever review, it is not the be all end all, right? You want to always turn in professional work. You always want to be a professional. But I think it's when I was starting out, I got so caught up in that stuff and I was spending all of this emotional energy and like stress because it was like, this one has to be perfect because I don't know, my brain, I was like, I was never going to write again, right? Unless this one's perfect. And that's just not true. And once you get over that hump, and I think part of that is just writing a lot and publishing a lot or making a lot of videos, whatever your thing is, right? You just have to get more and more stuff out and you stop freaking out about every little thing, which for longevity's purposes, like that is like the single most important thing you have to do is you have to stop treating every piece you're working on as the most important thing in the world. And once you get past that hurdle, like you're just going to keep producing, right? And at the end of the day, it's the body of the work that's going to speak for itself, not that one article.
Well, as our conversation comes to a close for today, I'd like to end on a positive note. What are each of you most hopeful about this year in the world of comics and pop culture journalism, and what are you most excited for in your own work? Erik, why don't we start with you?
Well, comics wise, we've been working with the guys at Magma Comics, and their stuff looks brilliant. Like it's just some interesting, very different kinds of stories. None of it's interconnected. It's pretty cool. And all the creatives there seem pretty jazzed about the situation, so that's awesome. Pop culture wise, it's a Doctor Who year, so I'm happy. I've got a new doctor. I've got new stuff to ponder, and I am a Doctor Who fan, so inevitably I'm gonna harumph something. I just don't know what it is yet, but I'm looking forward to that too. And I guess on the movie thing, Dune already happened, which was kind of Christmas for me. But I guess Deadpool and Wolverine, just because I want to know what that movie's gonna end up looking like, and how goofy they can make it and how many jokes they can make at Disney's expense. That's going to be fun.
Brad, what about you?
Oh man, comics. I'm just excited about comics. Like I love comics. I think comics have never been better, honestly. Every year I feel like just my mind gets melted by a particular book, a particular creator. You mentioned Magma Comics. Eamon Winkle on Principles of Necromancy,
Oh my
I think
god,
is a
right?
huge discovery. He's also a friend of mine, but
Okay, but yes,
this is a coming out party, and I can't wait to see what he does next. But yeah, I just love books. I just love books.
Lisa, what about you?
I agree with everything that he said. We are a unit, but I think I am living from con to con. I'm so excited to be going to C2E2. I'm so excited always for San Diego Comic-Con. Like I just love getting out there, going through them bins, finding some back issues.
We finally started doing panels, comic book couples counseling panels. Our second one is going to be at C2E2 on the Friday at 3:45.
You better come.
Yeah, everybody better be there. And yeah, it's exciting.
And
We'll have to meet up at C2E2. I will also be
Yes,
there.
please.
And I will be moderating the Hannibal panel on Saturday. So be there.
nice.
I think we're streaming that too. So you might, even if you're not there, you might be able to see it on Popverse. But what I'm excited about is as I leave Popverse, I'm going to be able to write more about comics, which I have been at Popverse through a news side, but not as a critic. And it's been a hot minute since I've been able to sit down and write some analysis, some essays. So I think there's some really great stuff coming out, especially in the kids graphic novel space, which is always kind of where I turn first. Judd Winnick has a new Hilo book out, which is very exciting. But in pop culture, I just came back from CinemaCon And Mickey 17, the new Bong Joon-ho movie with Robert Pattinson, looks incredible. Nosferatu, which is coming out next year, also looks incredible. Like I think there's always something to look forward to. If no one's seen Black Sails yet, it's on Netflix now. You got to watch it. It's a great pirate show. Like I think that's kind of the fun part about being a critic is like you get to write about anything and everything, and there's always something coming out that you can get excited about, like Doctor Who. And like that's what I love about the job.
Well, I want to say a
Yeah,
huge.
no, that's.
Oh, go
Oh, if I
ahead.
may,
Please.
that's kind of the big bonus is that sometimes we get to be at the vanguard. I remember many years ago I was invited to a set visit for the show that was based on a comic book I'd never heard of. It was called Winona Earp, and it was the best time. I could not believe how great the set visit was, how welcoming everyone was, and then I got super nervous. I was like, oh God, I hope this show's good. And then at the premiere, like 2 minutes into the second episode, I'm like, okay, this is gonna work out. This is gonna be good. I'm able to face everybody. And like, I'm with you. Not knowing that, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, Earpers would be a thing. And there'd be this incredibly intense community around the show. So I was like, I'm so privileged to have known about it, maybe about 10 months before the phenomenon began. That's one of the great things about this job.
Well, I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for engaging with me in this conversation. I think it is such an important one. I think it's important to raise awareness for what journalism is, what you do each and every day, and the hard work that it takes, the time, the effort. So thank you, first and foremost, not only for being part of this panel, but for the important work that you do each and every day. Thank you so much. It is very much acknowledged and appreciated. And for those who want to see your work, who want to listen to your work, what is the best way to find you? Brad and Lisa, we'll start with you.
You can find all things comic book couples counseling at comicbookcouplescounseling.com. That's the easiest way to do it. On social medias, we're at CBCC Podcast, and please come seek us out and say hello.
And Tiffany?
Until I grow out of my Twitter problem, I'm at Exploding Arrow on Twitter. Most of my recent work obviously is at thepopverse.com, and you can follow me specifically, and I have a monthly newsletter at tiffanybabb.com.
And Erik?
Oh boy, here we go. Comicon.com for any comic stuff. That's comicon.com. The Comic-Con on most socials. Personally, Erik S. Amaya on most socials. And of course, treadperilously.com is the home of the podcast, where we watch bad episodes of good shows.
Well, again, a huge thank you to all of you. Thank you, viewers, for watching this as well. And I appreciate all of your time. Thank you again. Good to see everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.
You.